Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Summer Morningstar, and this morning I woke up with a flow of inspiration about this topic of domination evolving back towards partnership as the model for our basic relationship with each other, with ourselves, with the planet. And how this topic is coming into play in the often controversial discussion and practice of vaginal steaming. And I wanted to share some perspectives that came out of this early morning, sort of between sleeping and waking inspiration, and feeling like guidance coming from deep within and from those feminine realms of dream time. So this is inspired by a recent article that was briefly posted by one of my mentors and a great educator about herbalism and women's health, Aviva Romm. She posted for maybe a couple of hours an article that she wrote, basically saying that she didn't really support the practice of vaginal steaming for quite typical reasons that this perspective has been shared of late. And I was quite surprised and shocked to hear her writing about these perspectives and these reasons why she didn't support vaginal steaming, because they seem to be quite contradictory to how she normally approaches these topics. And she even sort of owned up to that in the article. And I know I wasn't the only one who felt this way about her article, because she took it down. She removed it from publication, and it was a podcast episode as well. So she had an audio and a written version. And she took it down within a few hours, saying that she had had such intense and controversial feedback from it, and that it had really upset a lot of people. And it's understandable that it upset a lot of people, because one of the foundations of her teachings, and it's even in her books, she talks about how valuable traditional practices are, especially in herbalism, and how so many principles that come into play in vaginal steaming and the practice of practitioners teaching women how to reclaim this traditional practice. That's a traditional practice, not just for one group of people or one culture of people. It's a traditional practice in cultures and people all over the world, because it is so valuable. It is a very healing practice, much like drinking tea or smudging. It's just another way of admitting the healing herbal properties into the body is through steam. And steam has been used not just vaginally, but in all areas of the body. People have been taking steam baths. People do face steams. Breathing steam in with herbs in it is a time-honored tradition for helping to clear up congestion in the sinuses and in the lungs. And then steaming the whole body, not just for skin health, but for overall body health, is well known. And nobody's asking to see studies about either of these practices that prove the benefits, because everyone knows and feels automatically the benefits of these practices. And nobody dismisses these practices or warns against these practices because they're dangerous, because you might burn yourself with steam. No, these practices have been going on in all cultures all around the world, and herbalists have been recommending using steam as a delivery method for the healing benefits of herbs. It only becomes controversial when we talk about vaginal steaming. And the reasons that criticizers of vaginal steaming list are no more valid with vaginal steaming than they are with these other forms of steaming or fumigation, it's often called, because using smoke or steam as a way to deliver herbal benefits, herbal healing into the body, this is just a part of a complete herbal practice. You can read about fumigation as a method of delivering herbal medicine in most herbalism books. And it only becomes something to criticize when we're talking about doing that in the vaginal area. And so this was very shocking to me because Aviva Romm is very much a proponent of using herbs in an integrative way with medicine. She was a midwife and an herbalist before she became a medical doctor. And she started the integrative medicine education programs in medical schools in the United States because she was so shocked at how little was being taught about herbalism and botanicals and the successful use of botanicals in medicine. And so she was a big proponent of supporting studies to happen that showed the benefits of herbalism. But she also talks about in her writings how many herbal practices haven't had studies done on them about their effectiveness, but that doesn't mean they're not evidence-based practices, which is one, criticism she brought up in her very own article about vaginal steaming. And this she also then, this is very contradictory to what she talks about in her general discourse about herbalism, in that she validates that herbalists don't necessarily have typical scientific studies proving the effectiveness. They just have the results of their practice and many, many long years of practice and their mentors passing down wisdom that comes from many, many long years of herbalists using these herbs and knowing their effectiveness because of the results they're seeing in their clients. And she calls this valid in her writings. She talks about this as valid evidence-based, just as valid as the scientific research. And yet, in her article about vaginal steaming, she claims that there's no research, actual research, and criticizes this type of knowing the efficacy of a treatment, which she earlier in her writings said was perfectly valid. So she's very much contradicting herself. And I'm very curious and wanted to, this is only one of the ways that she was contradicting herself and by coming out as not really supporting vaginal steaming. And it was making me very curious. Why is that? Why is there this sudden, steaming is dangerous, fumigation, this disregard for this time-honored multicultural practice of using smoke and steam to deliver the herbs in the body when it comes to vaginal steaming? And, some of the other arguments that not only Aviva Romm, but other criticizers of vaginal steaming use are that, it's hot. You could burn yourself. Well, so is herbal tea. You can burn yourself drinking herbal tea if you're not careful to check and make sure it's not too hot for your body when you drink it. This is the same care that we need to take with eating food, hot food, or taking a hot shower or a hot bath. It's the same kind of care. And yet suddenly with vaginal steaming, it's terribly dangerous because you could burn yourself, and therefore it's too dangerous of a practice for people to be using. Not quite holding water in my book as an argument against something. And and then there's also this argument of equating vaginal steaming with other traditional practices that have been shown to be dangerous and harmful, like foot binding for women and um, circumcision for men and women, genital circumcision or mutilation. And equating vaginal steaming with these types of practices is just outrageously erroneous. Vaginal steaming has the potential harm, like I said, that is equal to, say, drinking a cup of tea that's too hot and really slurping it down and not paying attention and burning your mouth and throat. You'd have to really work hard at damaging yourself, hurting yourself by drinking a cup of tea. And you would also have to work really hard to do that with vaginal steaming. It's very clear that the steam is too hot and you just step away and you wait until it cools off. It's anywhere near these dangerous traditional practices that these criticizers are talking about. And and then, she also mentioned in the article, and other criticizers of vaginal steaming also mentioned that, there's no proof that's false advertising for vaginal steam practitioners, professionals, to say that it has these benefits, these health benefits that women are experiencing with vaginal steaming, like, decreased menstrual cramps, helping the healing process postpartum, helping the healing process of other feminine health imbalances like endometriosis, infections, and ovarian cysts, helping to balance out hormones, helping to balance out. There's a long list of health benefits that vaginal steam practitioners are sharing with their potential customers about, and are receiving all kinds of criticism because there's no research to show necessarily that this is true. And yet, like I was saying before, Aviva Romm validates the unofficial research that practitioners do, herbal practitioners, midwives, all the time, working with their clients, and they just find out, they know what works because their mentors have passed it down over the years, even though there's no official research. And in the end of the article, she says, say it what it is. It's a ritual. It might feel very nice. It might feel like a spiritual practice. And yes, that's true. It does feel nice. It can become part of a spiritual practice. But that doesn't mean that it's also not these other things, these biologically supportive things, that those two can go together. And that was another reason why I was so shocked by this perspective from Dr. Aviva Romm, because in most of her other writings, she weaves the spiritual ritual practice of herbalism and other healing aspects of life, encouraging clients to meditate and to have spiritual practices. She weaves it so wonderfully together in her teachings with medical or physical healing. And somehow now saying, well, if we don't somehow extract the placebo effect from it, then it's not valid. And yet in her book, she talks about how placebo is a very valuable thing and can be a valuable contributor to our healing process. So it just seemed all of her arguments completely contradicted her normal take on things. And this is why she had such a response from her readership, from her listeners, because they were so, used to her having a different take on it. And then there's this question, this curiosity in me about, what is it about vaginal steaming that is so controversial? And so I wanted to address this eh, in the context of the journey from the domination model of relating to the partnership model of relating. And this is something that Aviva Romm even talks about in her teachings, not necessarily using those words, but in the different models of care that she and other herbalists outline quite commonly, to sort of look at some of the foundational perspectives that different models of care are using. And you'll see when I share about this, another reason why it was so shocking that she wrote that article in the first place. So the three main models of care that we see nowadays are as follows. The one is the medical model, which is often called the mechanical model, in which we see the body as a mechanical organism that's just an amalgamation of all these parts, similar to a car or another machine, and that uh, we can affect change in the mechanical structure of the body by introducing substances that create a change, that cause a change in how that mechanism is functioning, or by cutting out, removing, physically changing the parts through surgery um, in some way. And this model um, can be wonderful if some um, big influence has happened, like an accident where parts of the body have been injured or rearranged and need to be put back in their place, or if there is a big illness, a cancer or something that needs to be removed, and it can be very valuable, and yet it often tends to miss underlying causes and separate itself from the integrated nature of the human being that includes emotional and spiritual well-being that deeply influence our physical health. And so this often disregards the effects of trauma, the underlying reasons behind things like addiction or chronic disease, or say autoimmune disease and other mystery illnesses. And there's a whole slew of other places where this mechanical medical model falls short of our human experience because it's not seeing us as an integrated whole. One of those being that it sees each system or each organ as something separate instead of part of a whole system. So this is why feminine health has been so neglected, because it's much harder to sort of take a woman apart and put her back together, because this is true for men too, but the woman's endocrine system is much more complex and interwoven throughout the whole body. So every system is interwoven with a woman's reproductive system because of all of the hormones and all of the emotional components that are in play in a woman's body that are very important, because in order to reproduce another human being, there needs to be a certain emotional state in place. And if that emotional state isn't there, then those systems get impaired. And so this is why many women and men, but people of all genders are looking for alternatives to this mechanical medical model. And this is also why older traditions that have been practicing a more holistic approach to medicine, like Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, uh, tend to have a more complete effectiveness because they integrate the emotional well-being and the spiritual well-being of the person in the healing practice. So another foundational model of how we relate to health and well-being and healing that is an alternative to this mechanical medical model is the heroic model. And sometimes this blends with the mechanical medical model. And the idea of this is that in the heroic model, we see that if something is imbalanced, or the perspective is put forth that if something is out of balance in the body, if there's dis-ease or pain or injury, that there is something wrong with the body, something toxic, okay? And that drastic measures need to be taken. So you can tell if someone is using a heroic model of care by if they're talking about how you need to cleanse your body, and that there's drastic cleansing practices like water fasting, like drastic dietary changes, extreme dietary change. I'm very familiar with this model. It was something that I practiced for many, many years. I was a mostly fruitarian, about 70–80% fruitarian, vegan, low-fat vegan practitioner for 11 years, and did about three-day water fast a year, and did sometimes water fasting for even longer. And there was a big focus on somehow being, and even spiritually and emotionally, that my emotions and my ego were something that I had to get rid of somehow, cleanse out of my system. So there were a lot of yoga practices focused on purification. And often these heroic models are doing extreme, intensive practices to create a state of feeling transcendent or ascending or completely transforming the body, mind, and spirit in intense ways. Now, I feel that both this model of care, the heroic model, and the mechanical medical model are both domination-based approaches to health and well-being, because they're saying, okay, the body, there's something wrong with the body, with the symptoms are a sign that something is wrong, and therefore we're going to take drastic measures. We're going to use a drug that has a deliberate effect. It's going to change the way things are functioning in the body. We're going to, completely go against the natural instincts of the body by fasting and drastically changing the diet and, basically starving the body and putting the body into starvation mode. And, we're going to do other things to kind of get away. That's the transcendence model of spiritual and emotional growth, is getting away from the being the way it is now, through intense practices. So by doing something and dominating the situation, we're affecting change with those models. And it has become, the third model of care has become more and more a resting place for me, particularly, as I felt the long-term detriments of that kind of heroic self-care lifestyle. Because every time I would do some kind of intensive practice or retreat, there I would be on this roller coaster ride, and that can be, in the long term, very depleting for the system, and imbalancing can really create more long-term imbalance and instability, and therefore then more contraction around that instability to try to stabilize. So that's how that roller coaster ride gets going, both physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so I've found a real resting place in this third approach to self-care and professional healing practices, which is often called the wise woman care, the wise woman model. And this model is based on partnership with the body, partnership between practitioners. The other models, the practitioner is the authority, and you probably don't really want to do what the practitioner is telling you to do. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't taste good. It puts you in a state of stress. And you don't necessarily, if you do want to do it, like all the fasting and stuff, if you really look down inside, for me, it was a trying to get away from myself, a trying to put the responsibility on someone else, a trying to do something drastic to get away from what I was feeling inside and from the pain that was hurting inside. And so that's sort of a domination model, letting someone else dominate my healing process. And this wise woman model of care, caring for ourselves and caring for each other, says that we are all whole and complete just where we are. And that all we need to do, if there is something out of balance, is nourish our body's natural healing capacities. That we have our bodies have an intrinsic healing process, and that all symptoms that we might have are simply messages from our body letting us know that something's out of balance. And oftentimes the symptoms, in fact, most times the symptoms are our body's attempt at healing whatever's out of balance. So I'll give one example of this. So one of the criticisms of vaginal steaming is that if you try to use something that's hot and wet to heal a hot, wet condition, for example, vaginal infection, say a yeast infection, that you're just going to make it worse by adding more heat and more wet to that infection. And if you're in an actual flare-up of a vaginal yeast infection, then yes, you may instinctually want to put something cool. But wet still works. Like I know when I've had vaginal yeast infections that sitting in a cool water sitz bath is very soothing. Okay? But water itself doesn't necessarily make our tissues more wet, like more damp on the inside. I mean, yes, while we're in the water and just when we get out of the water is on us. But actually, those of you who might be swimmers or who spend time in especially warm water, I soak in hot springs all the time, and I'm a warm water therapy practitioner, so I spend long hours in warm water with my clients and my practicing other practitioners, and we practice together. And our experience is that after we get out of the water and we dry off, our skin is less wet. Our skin is more dry, and we have to moisturize. So applying steam, for example, hot, heat, and wet, when we're not in an active infection, actually helps to draw out any residual stored up heat and wetness and dampness that's part of the infection cycle if you have recurring infections. So the way this works, the way I see it, is that the body in the partnership model where we're seeing the body as and these symptoms as the body's natural way of healing, intrinsic healing wisdom. In an infection, the heat, the itching, the swelling of the tissues and the excess moisture in the tissues is actually the body's way of eliminating the infectious organism, the virus or the extra fungus that's in there. So the body is flooding the area with lymph, with fluids, and with heat to remove and eliminate that infectious organism. So instead of trying to stop the symptoms, we can address the underlying cause, which is this overgrowth of infectious organism. And that's what creates long-term healing. Um, well, and you know, a lot of things like for yeast infections, over-the-counter drugs, they target the organism, kill the organism, and that's what stops the infection. But there's a deeper cause of why that organism got overgrown in the first place. Because and instead of just seeing that as something wrong or toxic about our body, we can see that this overgrowth of a particular organism as a message of something being out of balance in our overall health and start to inquire about what that might be. And so there's lots of different theories and philosophies about that, and how to heal from chronic infections. Steaming is very helpful in that it can deliver herbs, herbal constituents that might be used orally, for example, to um, help bring the system back into balance and help to eliminate the excess of those organisms. We can deliver them directly to the area where those organisms are residing. And we're also giving that heat and moisture, extra moisture to the body so that it doesn't need to have an immune response because we're providing that heat and moisture that then flushes out the infectious organism, which may still be hiding in there, even if we've hit it with some kind of an antibiotic or antifungal. Often what happens when we use those types of medications is that the fungus or the bacteria finds a place to hide out where you can't reach it with that stuff deep inside the tissue. So the cold cream, for example, that you might insert just touches the very surface of the skin, and oftentimes it's not a very delicious ingredients list, right? And so my experience with using those, I only think I used them once in my life, and I've had more than one yeast infection when I was younger. My experience was just like, ooh, get this stuff out of me. I don't want it in me. And because of that displeasure, I feel our skin just sort of repels it, and it sort of maybe topically treats just what's there on the surface, but those bacteria and those yeast can burrow deeper into the tissues and hide. And so what the steam does is it's pleasurable, it's warm, it's giving the body what it would naturally do itself, what our body would naturally do to eliminate these um, organisms, this excess of organisms. It's giving that warmth, it swells the tissues up, it opens up the cells, and it's pleasurable. So the whole body is saying, oh, yes, let this in. So all of our tissues and cells open up, which then can deliver, then the constituents of the herbs can be absorbed and welcomed into the body. So it's not that the steam is going through the physical opening and through the vaginal canal into the womb. It's that the tissues and the cells are opening up their membranes and absorbing the herbal constituents deep inside the tissues, not through the vaginal opening. So this is another criticism that you might see, saying if you understand female anatomy, you would know that there would be no way for the steam to travel through the vaginal opening and into the womb because that's closed off. You know, it's not open. And it's true. It's not an open tunnel for steam to travel through. But what the steam does do is in the warming of the tissues and bringing circulation there, the herbal constituents can absorb deep into the tissues, deeper than anything inserted into the vaginal canal that might be cold or uncomfortable, because it's so pleasurable. And so those herbal constituents that can then the body says yes and absorbs it and can use that heat, that warmth, that moisture, and those herbs as nourishment for the natural healing process. So it's a powerful practice, and because it is such a lovely, meditative, pleasurable practice, it also lends itself well to blending with emotional healing practices and spiritual healing practices, meditations and guided visualization. In fact, I do this all the time because there you are standing. I like to stand over the steaming pot of herbs, do some movement, some dance, which is another beautiful way that it can be a healing process, is bringing more circulation into the pelvis through movement and dance, and then through chanting or listening to guided meditations or listening to beautiful music. It's very well integrated with these types of practices that can be very healing. And so it's the combination of the actual physical herbal constituents and then the emotional and spiritual healing practices that can be easily blended with it. And so there you have it. And then along with this long-standing tradition of cultural and ancestral practitioners that we can rest into the wisdom of knowing back through the lineage of these different, many people say that they talk to their ancestors who maybe their current ancestors, their mother or their grandmother didn't practice this, but they can connect with the ancestral wisdom that resides in ourselves and receive guidance about which herbs to use and what emotional healing process is important to attend to as we're doing the steaming practice. And our womb is a very powerful and important portal to this ancestral wisdom. Some practitioners, myself included, say that there is and have the experience of this energetic umbilical cord that connects us through our wombs, through our navel, back through the generations and forward through the generations, so that as we invite the healing of the herbs, which is both physical and energetic. If any of you have used homeopathic or flower essences, it's not just the physical properties of the herbs that we're absorbing, it's also the energetic properties of the herbs that have emotional and spiritual healing qualities. And this, again, is something that hasn't been studied or researched a whole bunch, although you can find some studies and research, but it has been used for many, many generations, with practitioners passing down the wisdom from seeing the benefits that this has had on their clients and themselves. And so that, according to Aviva Romm and other holistic healing practitioners, is very valid evidence-based practice to share what mentors have shared over the generations, and to support people to utilize these nourishing healing approaches that are based on partnering with the body, listening to the messages of the body, and nourishing the natural healing process of the body. So in my vaginal steaming practice, what I like to do is educate women who are menstruating about, and help them to listen to the messages that their womb might be giving them in their menstrual cycle, and any symptoms they may have, any imbalances that they, pain or suffering they may have around their menstruation, around their, pregnancy or childbirth, all kinds of things, infertility, endometriosis, intense menstrual pain or excessive bleeding. All of these things um, are a sign, and there's well documented research about how the menstrual cycle is a vital sign that is often ignored by many medical doctors, which is the equivalent of ignoring someone's heart rate. These other important vital signs that you go to the doctor, what's the first thing they do? They take your weight, they take your blood pressure, they listen to your heart, they measure your heart rate. They also, the menstrual cycle is just as important of a vital sign as those are. And yet it's often very cursorily mentioned. Yes, they'll say, when was your last menstrual period? But as far as any symptoms of pain or irregularity or excessive bleeding, things like that, that's pretty much ignored or dismissed as normal. The range of what's considered normal in the medical model is huge. It's considered normal that women should be suffering every month in their menstrual cycle. And so I like to educate women to say, look, if you're suffering with your menstrual cycle at any part, whether during the bleeding time, whether pre-bleeding time, whether post-bleeding time, if you're suffering on any level, emotional, spiritual, physical, then that is a sign that something is out of balance. It may be physically out of balance, maybe having to do with your nutrition, maybe having to do emotionally, maybe spiritually, maybe there's a calling, a creative calling that is tugging on you, that you're, not following, that's really wanting you to engage with it. There could be any number of fully integrated things if we look at our whole being. And if we look at the menstrual cycle as something that's involved with every system of our body. So physically, there's an imbalance in your endocrine system. And why is that? Um, where's that coming from? Often from stress, chronic stress, which is often from the way our lives are set up. And so how do we create the change in our personal lives and in our social lives um, to allow for healthier lives and less suffering for women? So this is a big, important part of my work as well. And that results in healthier lives for everyone, because as women, we're most often taking care of others and supporting others. And when we're unhealthy and unhappy, we have less to offer to our loved ones. And when we are healthy, we have more support and love and care to give everyone in our lives. And so everyone benefits when women are healthy and happy. So yes, vaginal steaming is an excellent partnership model care practice that we can do with ourselves if we approach it with that model. Now, there are plenty of people, I'm sure, that will use vaginal steaming in the heroic model, for example, where they're claiming that the womb is needing to be cleansed, right? And my perspective on that is that just like we might get constipated in our bowels and we might need support to help the bowels to relax and to flow more freely by changing our nutritional practices, by looking at our stress levels, and by looking at our hydration levels, and possibly even if it's really backed up, we might need to, take some herbs to get things moving. The same is true for the womb. And especially if we have bowel constipation, the womb is very likely to be somewhat constipated in that menstrual cycle. And the same is true for the liver, which processes the hormones. So if our liver gets backed up and stagnant and we're not processing our hormones, then our hormones get out of balance as well. So in Chinese medicine, the liver is often addressed to balance out women's hormonal imbalance and supporting the liver to function more efficiently through lifestyle, through herbs and all of that. And so it's not so much that the womb is dirty, it's that our lifestyle might not be supporting the womb's natural cleansing process. Just like it might not support our liver's natural blood filtering process. It might not support our bowel's natural elimination process, or our bladder for that matter. And so steaming is an excellent way to support the womb to come back into balance and to be able to fully have its complete cycle of release and elimination of blood and tissue each month. And if that is stagnant, then yes, there can be a backup or a buildup of tissue and blood that the womb hasn't been able to flush out. And so with steaming, it's not so much that we're doing an intensive cleanse, it's more that we are nourishing the body's natural cleansing process and bringing that back into balance. And vaginal steaming works best in combination with other herbal practices like drinking tea. And we're going to be careful when we're drinking our tea and when we're doing our steaming that we're making sure that tea isn't too hot to drink and that the steam isn't too hot to sit over or stand over. And, there might be other ways that we nourish our body's natural cleansing process. For example, smudging, using burning herbs and incenses to nourish our natural cleansing process and support it. And so there may be some that, you might see spas that are promoting vaginal steaming without such a focus or understanding on the overall health that the overall health of the woman that the menstrual cycle is a signal about, and that those spas might be focusing more on the appearance of the vagina, the tightness of the vagina, and may combine it with other practices which nobody seems to criticize, like waxing, for example, pulling out body hair, which to me seems quite damaging, ripping out your body hair, and quite dangerous, and yet no one is criticizing that. And then, of course, bleaching of the anus and other areas if you don't like the color of your skin. So there's lots of practices that are much more on the surface that sometimes vaginal steaming is lumped into, and this is one of the things that criticizers of vaginal steaming do, is they lump it in with these kinds of practices, saying, oh, you're just supporting this idea that there's something ugly or dirty about our vaginas and that they need to be cleaned and purified or like that. And yes, some people may use vaginal steaming in that way, but vaginal steaming, that doesn't mean that vaginal steaming as a whole is all about that. On the contrary, it is a time-honored tradition in many cultures that deeply supports our overall health and well-being as women, and our overall menstrual health, our fertility and recovery from childbirth, and our emotional and spiritual health as well. So that's my podcast on the partnership versus the domination model of care, and how vaginal steaming can be in this partnership model of partnering with ourselves, partnering with our practitioners. So, as a practitioner, I choose to be a partner, a healing partner with my clients and students, encouraging them to listen to their own body wisdom, and that is more informative to them, and more important for them to listen to than putting me in any authoritative position. Yes, I might have information. I'm an educator, and so I might have new information and to share with my clients and students that might influence their decisions about their health. But ultimately, we're partners. So I'll do research. I encourage my clients and students to do their own research and connect in with their inner guidance. And that's why I love vaginal steaming, is because it's a time when you're really connecting with yourself, where your sensitivity, where your the womb space is, I feel, the source of so much of our inner guidance, of anybody of any gender. That space, the womb space, is rich with connection to our ancestral guidance, to our spiritual guidance. In yogic traditions, the Purusha is the name for our individuated God self, our direct connection to divine energy that is our unique flavor of divinity. And it is described as being below, a couple of inches below the navel and back towards the spine. Guess what else is there? The womb. And everyone's hara, which is the name for the energetic center there, or lower dantian, these are all different names for this area of the body. It's a very potent energy center, and is considered the center of our being in many traditions, and a place where we can connect with to receive guidance and energy, and let that flow through our whole being. And so in my biomystical womb practice and teachings, and in the apprenticeship upcoming, we will be activating that connection so that we can feel our inner guidance centered in the womb, and connect with that divinity within us, and nourish that divinity within us. And vaginal steaming is a big part of that practice, because it gives us that nourishing, warm, pleasurable moment of connection, awakening all of the tissues, the physical, the biological systems there, as well as our emotions and our spiritual connection in that area. So it's an integrated practice. So wonderful. I look forward to hearing if you have any questions about any of this. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me at wombcenteredhealing.com. And thanks again for listening. Until next time.